Hi, everyone. Welcome. So glad you're here. And while we're getting settled and waiting for folks to log in, please feel free to drop your name, your organization, and where you're joining in from the chat. We love to see where our community is tuning in from. And just a heads up, we're also going to record today's session for folks who couldn't make it live. Hi, Kathleen from Mission Viejo. Thanks for dialing in. Alex from Chicago. I see Christine from NYC. Jessica from San Francisco. Dan from Israel. Thanks for dialing in. Praveen from SF. Angel Modesto from the Digital Nest team. Awesome. Rachel from Raleigh. Thank you. Thank you. Safina and Matt from DC, Laura from Oakland. Amazing. Christian from Stockton, also from Digital Nest. I love it. I love that, Matt, you're appreciating the music. You're trying to bring the vibes. Hi, Amber from Seattle. Also, I'm also here in Seattle. Thanks for dialing in. Brett from Alabama. Esther, amazing, from Nairobi. Thanks everyone for dialing in. We'll just maybe another minute and then we'll get started. Thanks, Priyanka from New York. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I know more folks will likely roll in as we get kicked off here. But I want to welcome everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Vu. I am a strategic advisor here with Raise for Good and your moderator for today's conversation. We're so excited for our second community conversation within our AI series today. Thank you so much for making time to be here with us, whether you've been a part of our community here for years or if this is your very first time, welcome. For those of you who are new, Raise for Good is a strategic partner in the social impact space. We partner with nonprofit leaders and funders to build fundraising capacity and drive transformational change through our hands-on advisory work and the Fundraising Masterclass program. Our community conversations exist to surface the questions that matter the most right now and have honest conversations with amazing leaders in the room. And by the end of today, we hope you'll leave with something you can actually use to apply immediately, or at the very least, start the right conversations at any level within your organizations. And so today we jump into the conversation, and we are today at an inflection point where AI is no longer a future consideration for the social sector. It's a present day operational reality. Today's conversation moves beyond the hype to ask the harder question, not whether to adopt AI, but how to do it in a way that protects the people and communities that we all exist to serve. Everyone on this call, including the panelists and their organizations, are leading and navigating through uncharted territory. And we want to acknowledge that no one here has figured it all out. And regardless of where you are on the AI adoption spectrum, know that we're all here to learn together. So we encourage everyone to be curious with us today, and we welcome questions in the chat, which we'll also be able to be sure to raise during the Q&A session. And now I'm grateful to have these three practitioners who are living this work with us and will be sharing their insights with us today. Jacob Martinez is the founder and CEO of Digital Nest, a social entrepreneur and tech educator whose work advances economic justice within communities neighboring the Silicon Valley. Mary Rodriguez is the Vice President of People and Culture at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, where she leads talent strategy behind a $1.5 billion philanthropic mission to make AI and data work for humanity. And Beth Kanter is a decades-long thought leader in AI and nonprofit technology, co-author of The Smart Nonprofit, Staying Human-Centered in an AI-Automated World, and one of Fast Company's most influential women in tech. Jacob, Mary, and Beth, thank you for joining us today. So I want to just start off our conversation right away. And Beth, this one will be for you to help kick us off. Let's just set like the ground and like let's just like ground the room really quickly. And when you hear organizations say that they're using AI, right? What is the range of which that actually means in practice? And how does that and why does that range matter for this conversation?
Great. Thanks so much, Kim. Usually I see nonprofits in sort of one of four categories, and they're kind of a maturity model. And I call it the four E's: explore, experiment, enterprise, and exponential. So with explore, they may not have a policy, no training, and maybe there's some shadow use, a few people experimenting. That next stage is experimentation, where they have a formal policy. There's been some training. They may have a small group of champions, but there's no overall formalized organizational strategy that includes some change management and formalized learning. Then moving to enterprise, there's that organizational strategy that exists, and it includes both maybe looking at automation to save time and also augmentation to expand human potential with AI, and maybe embedding it in different software stacks. And there's active learning across departments and people, so it doesn't just stay between the person and AI. And finally, exponential, where it's being used to integrate with program delivery. And I'd see it's a bell curve now, with more organizations kind of struggling between that experimental stage and enterprise stage. And I think the speed bumps there are about change management, putting responsible use into practice, not just having it be a policy, and going beyond prescribed use cases.
Yeah, that's so great to help us kind of just like set the stage for our conversation today. I mean, you talked about like the change management piece, which is really important, and then the application and execution of it, which I'm excited to jump into with insights both from Mary and Jacob as well in this as well. So thanks for setting that for us, Beth. Jacob, at Digital Nest, you work with young people in communities that have historically been on the wrong side of the digital divide. What's at stake for those communities, specifically if AI implementation in nonprofits isn't done responsibly?
Yeah, thank you, Kim, and thank you all for joining us today. Further economic displacement. We saw this 25, 30 years ago with the dot-com boom, where all this wealth was generated for a very few set of people. And a decade later, we saw it again with the mobile revolution, billions of dollars of wealth generated for people. And, we work in communities that surround the Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. So this was wealth just doorsteps away from our communities. And so here we go again. We're seeing it. We're seeing billions of dollars being thrown at AI, and now the fears of this happening again to our communities. So the digital divide, it once was about like Wi-Fi access and coding, and let's teach every kid the code. And now it's about power, and it's about who gets to build the future, and who's like passively consuming it. We saw this with the dot coms, and we're seeing this again with AI, but it's happening at a much faster pace, where our communities are continuously being left behind. And so, we work with a lot of young people. We're preparing them for the workforce. It's not about just getting them in there and getting them a job anymore. Our work is really starting to shift around ensuring that our communities have a seat at the table, and so that we can address these structural injustices and the broader harms that's coming from this rapid pace of AI adoption.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob, for how you're thinking about it, and the work that you're doing at your organizations. I know for a lot of youth, I know one of the things that you grapple with is getting them prepared for this process, but then also ensuring that they've got a voice at the table, they themselves, one digitalness organization, but also the youth, right? Like, how do they maintain their own voice or develop their voice with the use of AI versus like as opposed to like learning it? Like, I know it's not an either or. How do you balance that with the way that you're kind of adjusting to these changes with your programming?
Yeah, it's a constant challenge. We want to ensure young people have the vocabulary to speak about these AI tools. We want them to have the skills and understand how to use these tools in a responsible way that's valued and that's grounded in their values and their so we're toying with that. And then we also kind of struggle with like we want to so they're diving in, they're using these tools, but we also got to remind them to that like we're their voice matters and their thoughts matter, and so to not to be so reliant on AI to come in and solve problems for you. And in the communities that we serve are predominantly Latino communities. A large portion of our young people are English language learners or first gen. And so language is a challenge. And so they see AI, these tools, as a tool to help them better communicate. But it's that again, it's that balance of them not being solely reliant on it, that we lose their individual voice. And so it's a constant back and forth. And with our staff, it's the same thing. We work with a lot of staff that come from, 70% of our staff come from the communities that we work in. And so they've been dealing with the same kind of challenges that our young people face with. And so we just ask our staff to be very transparent with the AI tools that they're using, to tell their supervisors, to communicate when they're using it. And so we can help coach them and help them navigate that fine balance between being too reliant on it and not losing their voice.
Yeah, that's so helpful. That's a really helpful example of how you're thinking about it, both from like the services perspective of how you're serving your community, but also how you're thinking about it within your organization, because it requires both. And I think this leads into the question next I have for you, Mary, which is from a culture and organizational design lens, what breaks down inside organizations when it scales AI tools before it has the right governance and change management in place?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Kim. And I also just appreciate the invitation to join both Beth and Jacob here. I come to this conversation from the lens of hope and positivity, and I hope that you will afford me just a small personal anecdote here. I have two children. One of them is an early career professional. She's navigating a workforce in a really technical industry that was not her primary area of study. And I've been begging her to come to me on Sundays to do AI experiments at home. And one Sunday she finally gave in, and I said, tell me something you really want to master at work that you haven't already been able to do. And she said, well, I'm not an engineer, and my job is to also help kind of advocate for and do demos about the products that we offer the sector. And I said, give me an example. And she gave me this example. We went on the website. It's a highly technical piece of equipment that is not within her, area of study or normal awareness. And really quickly, with the use of what I call a really great AI learning aid, we were able to ingest that information and have her do like a cognitive back and forth to understand in like practical examples how to explain the complexity of the technology. I think AI has promise when it allows for us to increase or decrease the barriers for participation where those didn't already exist. And that's true for the community that PJMF serves. We are one of the world's largest funders of AI for public purpose. And we are surrounded by stories of nonprofits who have adopted AI responsibly and are doing so with community voice at the core. Because the understanding that you can't really adopt solutions for the sake of, slap AI on that and let's hope it'll get better, or give staff LLM licenses and hope that all of a sudden productivity goes up and we're doing more with incredible work with AI for use at work. And so to answer your question directly, I think potentially there's a handful of things, but maybe the first that comes to mind is trust. Operating in a space where sometimes I also wish we'd change our vocabulary on this. AI adoption, I think, was a couple years ago. The tools are being used, whether you acknowledge them or not. But inside an organization that's really trying to come to think about transformation, I actually don't think the conversation starts with technology, but it centers back into what an organization is really trying to accomplish. And the technology or AI or anything else for that matter becomes an ancillary kind of vehicle to make that larger, broader kind of purpose possible. And so I think that surface level conversations around AI adoption um, tend to have there are real decisions that are happening underneath that. And I think without that acknowledgement, trust kind of becomes key to, success of any organization's adoption. But at PJM, if we think this through a framework of uh, how we go about doing that with ourselves, and I will tell you in full transparency, if you are rethinking your AI use policy at work right now, that's probably a really good idea because what you wrote 2 and 3 years ago, the tech has advanced so much that a lot of elements weren't accounted for, frankly, might not even apply at this point. Things like agentic use of AI within an organization can become really problematic without having the right governance structures in place. And so, to uh, I was going to say one more thing. Yeah. So adoption within, and I don't know if I quite answered your question, Kim, but
Yeah.
there's a roundabout way of personal story, and I'm excited to share additional contributions where you think they'll be helpful here.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, kind of what you laid out. I think it's like the importance of like keeping community at core, staying mission aligned and values aligned, and really leveraging the technology for as like the vehicle for what you're doing and not let that be the thing that wags the dog. with
Yeah, I was
what
thinking
you're
about
doing.
one more element
Yeah.
to add here, and I think that another element that is important to preserve is institutional voice. When an organization doesn't necessarily have clear guidelines for AI generated content or guidelines for how an organization wants to preserve what's uniquely theirs, what they believe about the world, how they communicate to the world, the AI slop becomes really evident to point out. And I'm so tired of people being thrilled about everything. And that, at PJMF, one of the things we do is we have a core set of communication principles that apply, and those principles applied well beyond people when people started using AI to generate, copy. But without that underlying standards and values at the core, the potential to lose your voice as an organization, especially when folks are writing things and representing you in a public space. Um, and then maybe even if the human in the loop practices aren't in place, you have the possibility of like accountability diffusion becoming something else that you just haven't accounted for. And so thinking about that up front, updating your AI use policies if organizations aren't already thinking about does this fit the moment that we're in right now, are just a couple other contributions I thought you were good to
Yeah.
share.
No, that leads into, I think, like just double clicking down to kind of the next level, thinking about it like structurally. Beth, like you write about nonprofits staying human-centered in an automated world, and like some of those risks that you see most consistently and underestimated by nonprofit leaders who are like really eager to move fast. And I've heard you use this example before about the sandwich, and I'm probably not saying Like just, I think it ties into what Mary was just saying, but also I think kind of falls into this space too.
Yes, definitely. I loved Mary's story because it's a great illustration of when you're coaching your daughter on different use cases and how she used it in an augmentation use case, right? To expand her communication skills to explain something versus just draft me something, right? Um, and I think when we talk about like risks, I think organizations start to focus on the automation use cases, and that becomes the default, which is saving time and saving steps. Like we're just going to have a draft for us, or we're going to, we're automating too much. We're automating our thinking, and that's where the risk comes. It can also, if we just focus solely on automation, that the time savings, which we should be applying into more human-centered types of activities like relationships or thinking about strategy, that it's freeing up that time, that just gets eaten up with more work. And research has supported that, the most notably a study from Berkeley. So I think there's really a huge opportunity that a lot of organizations are missing by focusing on automation only. And that is the augmentation, expanding human potential, which is really about improving the work, improving our capabilities, improving ourselves as humans, and redesigning work. The other thing is the cognitive risk, and this is an area that I've gone deep on, where we just let it become the default, where we have AI actually do our thinking when maybe sometimes writing is thinking, and those are things that we shouldn't delegate. And unless people are taught this, it's so easy to slip into that default. And then you get sort of down a slippery slope where you may be delegating human judgment. And so, Kim, you mentioned the sandwich. This is just a simple practical framework I teach, is that your interaction should be the human and AI sandwich when you're looking at an augmentation use case, that the human does some thinking up front. Maybe you've given it a rough draft. It can be really messy. There's AI in the middle, the AI pressure tests. It maybe does some research. It gives you feedback. And then you vet the output. Is this accurate? Is it actually true before you actually use the output? So, our brains are like muscles. And if we don't use them, we run the risk of descaling. And one other thing I just want to say, and it relates to Mary's point about updating your policy. Hallucinations are a documented thing, but those have changed as the models have changed. And now they're harder to spot because they're way more subtle. And I think the important thing to train people in and to mention in your policy is understanding when the model is directly referencing something versus an inference. It's making an interpretation based on something it read. And you can use techniques like inference flagging, but it's really good to encourage vetting with other humans, especially if you're working with something where you're not a subject matter expert. And it's especially true, I think, as more entry-level people are coming into workplaces, and we're using this more to have what I call cognitive mentorships, so that there's kind of a pairing of someone who's experienced around the topic and transferring that knowledge.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to remember that one. Cognitive mentorship. Another word for mentoring and working with folks who are more established and have like that institutional knowledge, which I think is great. Let's do a little bit of a switch, and I want to talk, and it still falls within the realm of, I think, thinking about governance, but specifically about data. Nonprofits hold like deeply sensitive information about the people they serve. Health, immigration status, financial need are some of those types of examples. What does responsible data handling actually require before an organization brings AI into contact with that data? And kind of a second kind of part to that question is, And I think I'm excited to hear about your thoughts about this too, is like, how can that be a lever for nonprofits to wield to become the driver of AI, driver of change in AI in the social sector? Because I think there's an opportunity here for nonprofits to take the lead rather than being on the back foot, which I think a lot of conversations around this have been about catching up, right? But I think there's an opportunity here for nonprofits to actually leap forward. Jacob, do you want to take this question first?
Yeah, happy to jump in and kind of goes back. We start talking about data, but first we got to ground it in AI policy, and we've talked about that a couple times already. But and the rapid change of this policy, and so we established an AI lab, which is a cross-departmental group of people in the organization that meet regularly to talk about, to review the policy and review the data that we're sharing to ensure that we're being safe and responsible. But we start with three kind of core principles of our AI policy. And the first being, when we use AI, does it bring value to digital nest, our members, and can you clearly articulate it? The second principle is we use AI in a safe way, and it protects all stakeholders, of course. You mentioned, we work with a lot of vulnerable communities, especially in these times. So that's of most importance. And the last principle is around literacy, transparency, and accountability. So making sure we're being transparent internally of how we're using it. Now, all of that is kind of the foundation of how we look at our data, and a three-tier kind of levels of like how private the information is. So the tier one, level one is public. So this is any information that's already published on our website that we're sharing on social media. You might be in our curriculum or training materials. And so this stuff is, our staff are okay to use this and fully allowed to use it and externally and incorporate into any learning model. And then the second is more confidential information. So it's strategy documents, things that we're using internally, things that we're working around, like as we're building our curriculum and training guides. So things are not finalized yet, but we're still in the works. So all of those things have to be approved by your supervisor in order before you upload them into anything externally. And then there's the level three things. That's level three items, and those are the really restricted things. So any of our member information, anything that's going to provide any personal identifiable information. Of course, any HR files are not allowed in, any assessments of our young people. So those are absolutely not allowed in terms of sharing out of any of our data. So that's how we kind of think about, we ground everything in principles, and then we have this three-tier structure of how we assess the sensitivity of our data.
Yeah, that's a really helpful example of just tangibly like how to set it up. And I like that it's kind of like the three kind of tiers that are really clear on what is kind of, everybody can understand that really simply. Mary, I'm curious your thoughts on kind of that second part of the question, and like how can understanding your data as an organization can be a lever that nonprofits can wield to be a driver of change in the social sector?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate something that I heard our president say, Velasdar, recently, that many of the loud voices on AI are selling either hype or warning of some collapse or horror, right? And there's usually the conversation, the narrative is usually on the tail of those two extremes. But neither of those is a real strategy. And I think that the leadership moment that's needed right now is holding both skepticism and that optimism and possibility, both in equal measure. I think my answer to that comes twofold. And I wanted to say something around setting guardrails early for sensitive data, and that's on the skepticism side. And then on the optimism side, this is the moment for nonprofits to lead. And so maybe I'll start with the first and with the last. And first is that our definition of visionary leadership is naming a vision that is so big and bold that sometimes it seems impossible to do. And the second part of that is proving it can be done. And the third part of visionary leadership is to share it with the world for free. And in order for us to do the second part, which is proving to the sector it can be done, we can't simply advocate for responsible uses of AI without doing it ourselves. And so that is why part of the programmatic work at PJMF includes a products and services function that builds AI tools for the public sector. And in building those tools, we have a set of responsible design principles that I think apply whether you're building technology or whether you're trying to adopt it within the organization. And many of them have already been touched on by Jacob and Beth. And I'll just say a couple of others that I think. First is human-centered design itself is designing with and for the end user. Communities, I used to work for a community development organization in Houston, and we used to say people are the experts of their own systems. When the folks who are most proximate to the problems that they care most deeply about should be co-creating and architecting solutions with nonprofits. Otherwise, you end up on the receiving end of having built something that's beautiful, probably aesthetically pleasing, that no one will use. Transparency is showing your work, making the data and the models and all of the decisions that are being made by the adoption of the tools visible to both users and as a kind of core principle of development. Fairness, auditing for bias, and testing outcomes that might come from any adoption within the organization or something that you've put into practice. And that comes alongside treating privacy and security as like consistent. You don't just do it once and then you put a bow on it and it's done. This is a constant internal practice of understanding guardrails like prompt injection and what we're doing with the ingestion of information. I love, Jacob, that you shared that kind of stoplight approach. We call it red, yellow, green, and we too are thinking about that in terms of the next evolution of our AI policy. Centering those who've typically been left out of the conversation with respect to AI design and adoption or deployment, and then sustainability, weighing the environmental, labor, and societal costs that really come to play. Those I'm happy to share. We wrote a blog that was kind of a post-launch reflection about how you put these practices in play if you're building tools. And I think that lends me to my second point, which is my point of optimism here, is that we're living in a moment that people will write history books about. And nonprofits are uniquely positioned to lead in this moment. And one of the things that frustrates me the most is oftentimes we come into these conversations with the assumption that we just need to be consumers, right? That innovation happens in Silicon Valley and that all of us are modern day today consumers of this technology. But that's not the seat that we all have to sit in. We too can be builders of the technologies, and nonprofits are uniquely positioned to do this because they're sitting on very, very rich data sets that represent the communities that they care about most very, very well. You don't have to go to very many news sources to find an example of how the typical LLMs being built today, those data sets that were used to train the LLMs are not representative of what communities really look like, right? Their language, their cultural practices. And so nonprofits are uniquely positioned to lead here, and they can also move themselves into the co-creators of technology and not simply consumers. And I think that's the real optimism and hope that we have for the moment that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Jacob, Beth, anything you wanted to add to that?
It was so well said. I was sitting here thinking about I know in my book the Smart Nonprofit, we talked a lot about like this is, we in the sector have this like leadership moment, and that we shouldn't be just panic adopting because we're fear of being left behind, or just being so skeptical of it that we're not going to touch it. And it's again holding our values, but understanding that, I mean, I like to use the metaphor of a river journey, that we're in the river and we're in the boat, and we have to know what our own values are connected to our organization so we can navigate through this, because it's not easy. The riverbanks, that's the organization's policy, because we're not in the open waters by ourselves. There's some guardrails set, but then there's the churn and the currents. And these are all of these big things that are out there, like job displacement, the environmental impact, all of those things that we necessarily can't control. But we might be able to bend, but they aren't a reason for us not to get in the water and try to paddle, right? So it's learning that navigation between understanding what, these big concerns and being ways that we at a bigger level can advocate for those, but also modeling what we can do and model responsible use, while we're in the water paddling and shaping the riverbanks.
Yeah, I like the visual on that. It's such a helpful way to kind of think about it. Jacob, you look
Yeah.
like you want to add to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I just want to recognize how challenging this is. And like we're a tech nonprofit doing workforce development, preparing young people for the workforce. So our mission forces us to be on the front lines of like trying to keep our young people ahead of what's coming and for jobs. And we're struggling. And it's a challenge for us to keep ahead and find the resources to do advocacy work or look about like how do we influence policy and how do we ensure that we have a seat at the table and train, a lot of our staff to do this type of work around policy and voice and advocacy. And it's a challenge for us. And so there's a lot of nonprofits out there that this isn't their missions work. There might be in the environmental sector or the arts or the, cultural organizations or or food insecurity, housing that are trying to also like not be left behind and yet don't have the resources or even their mission's alignment to this to kind of force them to be at the front of all this. So I just want to recognize that. I know how challenging it is. I have a lot of friends that do work in other nonprofits that are really struggling. And so I think there's the importance of like coalition building. There's the importance of like engaging your funders on what initiatives they're taking on and how they can share their perspective. I think about, reaching out to your legislators and sharing with them the challenges that your community is facing. So there's ways that other nonprofits can kind of stay at this, to make sure the communities are not left behind. A theme I keep repeating, but it is a challenge and it does take resources to do this work.
Yeah, I appreciate that acknowledgement of that, Jacob, because absolutely. And to remind folks that you're not in this alone, and to work with other partners within your kind of like service sector and things like that, because that collective voice is incredibly strong, right? And not to forget to leverage that. I think there's one that I want to kind of lead into for Mary, just from the funder side of things. Like there's a tendency for funders to support AI by paying for tools or technology kind of upfront, but for like the short term solutions, like what does support actually need to look like? And what are funders getting wrong about leaving or leaving on the table if they like stop at like the subscription fee as an example, right? I'm sure you're seeing a lot of that across your own peers. And Jacob and Beth, I'm sure you have great examples and insights into how like funders should think about it differently, what kind of conversations that nonprofits should be having with their funders or potential funders. But Mary, I'll have you kick that one off and welcome Beth and Jacob's comments too.
Yeah. Maybe I can answer this first by saying we in terms of PGMF's leadership here is and it goes to how you opened the session, which I really appreciated, is we're all trying to figure it out. And while we have a lot of conviction in what we've built, there is still a lot of room for experimentation. And I get very weary of people who prop up their LinkedIn profiles and posts and now call themselves AI experts. Everybody believes they're an AI expert about a lot of things, because everyone really is trying to navigate this kind of tech revolution in a way that for those of us in social impact, how we can turn this around and democratize the fruits of what AI has to provide in service of the communities we care about. And I think that are convening called Fund AI. All of these resources available online. If you're on this call and you are a funder, I highly encourage you to check out the funder resources page on our Learning Hub, which I'm happy to share. But it is a convening of about almost 200 top philanthropic organizations across the US who are also trying to think about how to implement or bring in AI into their strategy and how to assess tech projects from the right lens of, what is viable, and are nonprofits really filling a gap, or is this simply a fund the subscription approach? And I think from the nonprofit space, it's my colleague Jackie Watts recently co-authored a piece in SSIR with Duke, and it's a fantastic piece. It's very practical, very easy to read and understand. And the first tip there is clarifying AI for what, right? What is it that you care so deeply about as an organization? And how does AI help be a bridge to that broader thing? Making the technology or AI the core focus, I think tends to be where organizations might miss the mark and thinking that we need to adopt AI for the sake of adopting it because everyone is. Whereas going back to the core kind of mission of the organization, we find to be incredibly helpful, and then having those community and user inputs drive ultimately what those tech projects or portfolios look like. But paying for the tool is really kind of the beginning of the conversation and not really the outcome that we're trying to drive for. And I will also preface the fact that I do not make funding decisions at PJMF, but I'm close enough to the work that I can share that when a funder really decides to buy a software subscription, for example, without asking what happens on the other side of that decision, they've really funded a problem and not necessarily a full outcome and a solution. And I think the behavior change that is necessary within an organization is not necessarily the access to the tool. It's the combination of the things we talked about earlier, right? Trust, a clear answer to the question, what does this make possible for the people and community that we care about or that our mission is in service to? And when a nonprofit staff can't answer that question, the tool is that subscription is probably not the answer. And so I guess I'll say that funders themselves are trying to figure this out too. And I always tell folks, like, reverse engineer our grants list. We believe in full transparency, and every dollar we give, you can go on to mcgovern.org right now, and you can see every dollar that we've given. And then those organizations really are fantastic use case examples for what good adoption looks like. And our organization operates under the notion that the same rigor that's used in the tech spaces and where we would often think about where innovation lives, we need that same level of rigor inside organizations, mission-driven organizations. And so the grant-making team does pretty remarkable work. And the funding resources, a page on our Learning Hub, is essentially us feeding to the sector, to the philanthropic sector, ways in which they too can assess a nonprofit's viability of their project and how to incorporate AI into their strategy. So I'm happy to share that after the call with the follow-up resources.
Thanks, Mary. And for folks who are on the call, we will send out a recap email that will have some of these resources that our panelists have mentioned, so that you have access to them after the fact in case you don't catch them in the moment. Jacob?
Can I add just a little piece to what Mary just said? And I think about what I'm hearing a lot from funders these days is there's a lot of attempts to work at the systems level of AI. And so working through community college systems, working through the education system, developing more apprenticeships through corporate companies, and we all know systems work takes a long time. And with this new technology of AI, time is the biggest challenge that we have because things are rapidly happening so quickly from one year to the next. Our policy, our practices are outdated. And so who's suffering during the systems change work is communities and people doing on the ground, especially if you're not in an urban area. And so I'll give one example. We work in Stockton, California, which is about an hour and a half out of San Francisco. And we all believe that broadband, as every city has broadband now, that's been solved. But in Stockton, downtown, our building, we couldn't get broadband access. It's a low income community that still, in 2025 could not get broadband to our building downtown Stockton. And so that, I think about now with AI, we're trying to do systems level work. Once again, we're going to create a larger, if we're going to create a larger divide between those communities that don't have those resources if we are not doing both. Systems level work is important, but we need to be investing in local communities and we need to be investing in organizations doing on the ground work.
Yeah, I think that's such an important message, especially for folks who are the holders of resources to hear, because it's a yes and, right? Like you should be funding both at the same time because I think what ends up happening, to your point, systems get funded and then all the things that are happening day to day operationally on the ground, it gets left behind, right? And we see this over and over again. You've mentioned this as a cycle with other technology that we've seen come into play.
There's also, I'd love to just also add,
of course,
super practical, but this sort of both end, the balcony, right? We need the balcony, which is the systems change, but we also need the dance floor, which Jacob talked about. But I want to get specific about some dance moves that could be funded beyond just licenses. I was jotting a list. So fund beyond the technical skills. There's a lot out there on how to prompt, and that won't get us to responsible use and great outcomes and inclusive of our community. So people need understanding use case examples, right? Understanding workflow redesign, thinking about job crafting, teaching people the skills around critical thinking. What is human judgment? I know that sounds silly, but it just becomes more mushy as you work with these tools. And if you're not trained to understand that, you could hit those slippery slopes that I talked about. Also, models where you are not just funding one organization, but you're funding learning groups so that people are sharing what they've learned, but also within that teaching about how do we document what we've learned in real time. I know in the pressures, the day-to-day pressures of on the ground, we're getting to the next thing because we have to get this thing off our to-do list. So how can I use AI to get this done really faster? And documenting what we've learned seems like a real burden, or it's slowing us down, but it's so important to build on the next step as the next, new feature comes out or this. If you're just chasing the features without having the context of what you've learned and having that time to metabolize it and reflect. So funding that,
yeah,
which is
absolutely,
rather than assume organizations are going to do it.
Yeah, no, those are really great points and a great list of dance moves that I thought that was a great analogy. You have wonderful analogies for us to remember these by. Awesome. I want to just ask maybe a last question and then we'll jump into Q&A. And so we've already got one question in Q&A. So if you've got some questions that you want to ask, feel free to start dropping those in so that we can get to that. So just kind of a last question to leave folks with is, we know federal funding is contracting, community needs are intensifying. It's all these things that we're talking about, organizations being asked to do more with less. Is AI actually a solution to that pressure? Or does this implementation, irresponsible implementation risk making things worse for the most vulnerable people nonprofits serve? That's a big question to ask, but would love kind of your thoughts on that as we wrap up, how folks should be thinking about it.
I'll go really quickly, and I'll use a couple more analogies.
Yeah.
I bristle when I hear the left behind narrative, because I think a lot of that is being put out there by the companies, to be honest. And I think we need to feel empowered to push back against that, because that's what kind of drives this panic adoption. We're left behind, so we got to speed up. And it also drives us to focus on the efficiency piece without work design. And so we end up working faster and not being able to really metabolize that responsible use. So I think the answer is slow AI. And I want to use the analogy of the slow food movement. Because if you're familiar with it, it was started in Italy. It's known about know where your food comes from, sit down and enjoy the meal with other humans, and learn about the food and enjoy it. So I think that we shouldn't think about AI adoption as running through the McDonald's drive-through to get our fast food, and that we, even though there's all this pressure in the currents to make us want to do that, that we just have to like put a speed bump in it, and don't just sit, walk slowly and walk together.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Beth. Mary or Jacob?
Yeah, I think for me, that's a tough question. I like there is urgency for me because of our communities that we work in and our young people. We're seeing language models like discriminate applicants when applying for jobs based on you're seeing the AI agents doing this. We're seeing this entry level roles for professionals kind of being automated away, and those are entry level jobs for our young people, and so there is an urgency for me in order to make sure our young people uh, uh, have an opportunity and have access. But then I do hear Beth's point around we also don't want to create a panic where we're using it irresponsibly and thinking it's going to be the solution for everything and putting all our resources into that. So it's something I navigate daily. My staff does, and our communities are. I think what we can't do is put our heads in the sand and pretend like it's just going to pass us by. So no matter where you are, you got to engage somehow with it, just to because it is not going away and it's here.
Mhm. Thanks, Jacob. Mary?
Yeah. I appreciate the question, and I would say one of the things we've advocated for is for organizations and folks to move at the speed of trust. We constantly hear the private sectors fail fast, but in social impact spaces, building on what nonprofits organizations have been doing for years is building core trust with communities that they're in service to, and I think that this is no different, right? The pace exists so that um, things like inclusion and safeguarding and centering community voice and any type of adoption or transformation project uh, has to be core, and the consequences are very high for navigating that differently. Oftentimes, one of the use cases I hear about often is we're just going to make a chatbot or create a chatbot using AI. But a flawed chatbot, say, that is intended to give pregnant women solid and quality healthcare advice done wrong can be incredibly dangerous, right? And then a model that has not been tested for bias can deepen exclusion. And so the consequences are very high. And those elements are, despite what the world says about, Beth said it, the race, no one can really explain what are we racing towards. And frankly, are we in the same race? Like the race that the private sector is running towards is one of profit, and the race that the nonprofit sector and the philanthropic organizations care about is one that is in service of humanity. And those aren't even the same race. So like we should maybe stop talking about or using language and vocabulary that doesn't serve us. I don't know that directly answers your question, Kim, but I think moving at the speed of trust is important.
Yeah. Oh, well, thanks, Mary. And before we jump into Q&A, we'd love to get your real-time feedback with a quick poll that should be launching right now. And it should take less than 30 seconds to complete. And it just generally helps us shape the build future sessions. And so to answer or to enter any of your questions for the panel, please type your questions into the chat or the QA function. I already see there's 3 questions there. And for the Race for Good team, is the poll popping up, or should we just go ahead and I can jump directly into Q&A because I want to make sure we get to some of them. There it is. All right. So if we can quickly just kind of get through that. And then while folks are filling that out, I'm going to go and queue up the first question for the group. And we've got a few minutes. So if we can just, I want to make sure we get through the questions. So try to keep the responses succinct as possible. So the first question for all the panelists is that Mary, you've mentioned trust being one of the keys to thoughtful AI adoption. What does this trust look like in different nonprofits for nonprofit team members, donors, and those who are being served by the nonprofit? So I feel like you kind of answered that one a little bit, but if Jacob and Beth, you want to jump into it in terms of what your perspective is on what trust means for thoughtful AI adoption, and then I'll queue up the next two questions.
Yeah, I could jump in real quick. I kind of talked about it earlier around this transparency of our staff using it, and I think early on there was a lot of fears and a lot of shame, like almost a little shame, and our staff hiding the fact that they were using tools to help with their writing or do a first draft of a proposal or or doing research. And so we've been very upfront with our staff. Like, we want you to use it. You want you to communicate how you're using it. And so we do. There's an expectation that they always tell their supervisor how they're using AI, and no one's gonna get in trouble for using it. And then we also do an annual survey, and I think we're doing that with our donors too. Our donors are asking how how we're training our young people, and so we try to just be upfront and as transparent with our funders, our staff, our communities. We do a lot of our youth, our older youth actually lead trainings for nonprofits on how to integrate AI safely into your organization. We've done that for two local community foundations, and we're doing another one this summer for another foundation and their grantees. So we're an open book. We share everything with all of our partners and friends, and so that's what I would consider.
That's a great example. Thank you. I'm going to jump into the next question because I want to make sure we capture all these before our time is up. I really worry about what Beth mentioned, that without proper training in how to spot AI hallucinations or false claims, that so many people are consumed by mis and disinformation, specifically regarding democracy, voting, election integrity. AI has already shown to be a driver of dangerous distrust. It is clear we need legislation, training, and much more, but the tech came before all these guardrails. Thus, how should funders and nonprofits strategize about tackling AI perpetuated problems while using it for good?
I would just add, you can't interrogate systems you don't understand. And this is why broad-based digital literacy is a core necessary component in the moment we're in now. If we don't have structures that exist to help folks understand how are LLMs trained and why all LLMs are not created equal, and that's not a statement purely about values. That's a statement that understands how the models work, right? How they've been trained and what data sets have been used to train models. Those are all like just the broad. On Learning Hub, we have a thing called AI 101, practical like understanding, because that is the precursor for being able to interrogate systems and then understand where they do or don't serve humanity or the communities you care about. And so that's just one kind of point I wanted to add to that. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's great. And then I've got one more question, and then we'll wrap up since we're almost at time. If you had the chance to inform where a large investment of philanthropic dollars goes in the next 1 to 3 years on AI and workforce, specifically for youth and entry level, what would you recommend, and what's missing from current investments?
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't have Jacob give it
I
up.
know.
I was trying to create space for others. No, I think systems and community-based work, people doing work in community today. Like there's got to be that balance. It's not a or, it's an and so let's do both so we can have big change, but also ensure communities are at the table.
Yeah. Anything that's missing? Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
I was going to say, and I don't even know how this would be done, but providing some incentives to nonprofits or maybe to the sector to hire younger people. So less on the training side, but to the organizational side to have, hold those entry level positions, and also to really, I mentioned cognitive mentorships, but like also like what are the strategies that an organization needs to have to make sure that they have this pipeline, and to educate about what happens when you don't have an entry level pipeline coming into your organization several years down the road when your experienced people retire.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. It's very true. Well, I want to thank our panelists today. And as we wrap up, I think Jacob, Mary, and Beth made it really clear that responsible AI implementation isn't a technology problem, but an opportunity for leadership and culture to evolve. And that's actually great news for this group, because that's grounds that the social sector leaders know how to stand on. And the safeguards, the governance, the human review, none of that is optional overhead. That's the work. And so I want to thank you again to Jacob, Mary, and Beth for bringing such grounded, honest perspectives to the conversation that too often stays too theoretical. And so lastly, keep an eye out for your inboxes. We'll be sending out to all the registrants an email recap so you can replay today's conversation and share it with your teams. We'll also include all the resources to help you take action right away. And we are so grateful for the time that you spent with us today. Thank you so much again, and hope to see you at our next one. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Jacob.